Back in 2003 or 2004, when you were presenting some of the evidence of why you thought there was manipulation and suppression of the gold and silver prices, you actually had Russian officials at one of your conferences. So I'm curious if you could share for folks what happened and what they were interested in and anything you could talk about there. Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. As we continue to do what we can to unravel the gold and silver markets, and as my next guest, Bill Murphy of GATA and La Metropole Cafe, I think can certainly attest to a lot more complex than maybe we thought we were getting into when we first dug in. Quite an adventure out there, huh, Bill?
It's been something else, especially this past year or two. It's really astounding what I call the gold cartel has done and what they're able to do, and no one says a thing.
Well, it is interesting because what I'd like to dig into today is that back in 2003 or 2004, when you were presenting some of the evidence of why you thought there was manipulation and suppression of the gold and silver prices, you actually had Russian officials at one of your conferences. And now, a couple decades later, as things escalate globally, we see BRICS developing new global reserve currency basket. So I'm curious if you could share for folks what happened and what they were interested in and anything you could talk about there.
Yeah, well, it's actually kind of funny in a way, because in June 2004, there was an LBMA conference in Moscow, and the deputy chairman of the Bank of Russia, out of nowhere, started talking about these well-known economists that represented GATA, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. And he started saying how what we had to say about the price being suppressed by the Bank for International Settlements and the bullion banks. And he says that the gold market's the weirdest thing going. Doesn't make any sense. He said gold's, when what GATA found out, they suppressed it initially below 300. He said when the price should have been 720 if it kept up with inflation. And of course, that's the story of today. And then what happened was, in the next year, we had a conference up in Dawson City, a fantastic conference. And a fellow got a hold of us named Andrei Bykov, who was a consultant to President Putin. And he came to the conference and was overwhelmed by the thing. And he said it was the finest conference he had ever been to. And my colleague, Chris Powell, Secretary Treasurer of GATA, has been in touch with him all this time. And we wish him well. And he hasn't forgotten about GATA. And of course, what I have to say now, that suppression has gone on steroids this past year.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what in particular was it that you were talking about? It's interesting, since I've been covering this, we've had some news stories come out, but what were you talking about back in 2003, 2004 in particular that caught his attention and really made him suspect something wasn't above board?
Well, I mean, initially, I used to work with a guy named Frank Venerosa, who wrote something called the Gold Book. And he had found out from the Bank of England or some people over in Europe that the gold banks were leasing out their gold to bring in money, and it was suppressing the gold price because it was adding all the supply that nobody knew about in the gold market. So when long-term capital management blew up, the famous hedge fund, I heard about all these bullion banks selling gold, and then I realized from Frank that they were short something like 400 tons of gold, and if the bullion banks had to buy back all the gold that was leased, the price would have exploded and gone bananas, and maybe hurt them terribly financially, some of them. So they were suppressing the price, and I complained about it. And Chris Powell, my subscriber at the time, said, "I'm tired of you complaining about it. Let's do something about it." So we formed GATA in January of 1999 and began spreading the word. We had a conference in South Africa in 2001, which was the bottom of the market, and we've been at it ever since.
Yeah, and it's an interesting journey that you've had. And I'm curious, now that we see the situation that we're in today, here's Ronan Manley talking about Russia lines up state fund of precious metals, which is different than the Russian central bank, but we've seen a gold backing to the ruble. We've seen the ruble continue to rally against the dollar. And I'm curious, based on everything that happened 20 years ago, what do you see going on? What do you think about what we're seeing going on now?
Actually, I feel really strongly about it, and other people may not agree, but from what I've learned in doing this now every day for 23 years, nothing matters except what the gold cartel is. I got it, which we got it since learned it also involves the U.S. government backed by the Fed and Treasury. Only thing that matters is what they do. I've never seen anything like what they've done this past year. Almost every morning, either before the COMEX opens or 2 hours after, they bomb it in the paper market. Raid after raid after raid. No matter what's going on, they raid it, and it's terrorized the traders in the market and investors. And here you've had the most bullish scenario imaginable for gold and silver, and gold's gone nowhere, and silver's gone down and keeps going down. And we can get into that, but it's the suppression is on completely on steroids, and nothing else seems to matter. They changed the BAS rules, gold in Russia, this, that. What? Gold's what, 1820? It's nowhere. It was there 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah, well, it is interesting. You see gold at least near its all-time highs, has cracked 2000 a couple of times. I'm still a little confused. The pricing that when gold hit 2000 a couple of months ago in the middle of the escalation of war, they already had some of those interest rate hikes priced in. And we have seen gold come down from there, but silver is still quite a bit below what most were thinking with a $1,800 gold price. And I know you're tracking the open interest and activity on the COMEX every day. What are you seeing there right now?
First of all, I'm the most wrong guy going on silver. Years ago, I thought silver was going to make a move towards 100, not zero. You can't get more wrong than that. But I think I can explain it, and I know how this is how bad the price suppression scheme is. All you hear about is inflation every day. Inflation, inflation. Well, I bought silver many years ago with one reason was to protect myself against inflation. Huh? If you look at the silver price, it's deflation. And that's how bad the price suppression is. Now, before we get into the other stuff, I'm not getting out. I'm all in, and I think it's going to explode one day. And when it does, it's going to go bananas very fast to the upside. I don't know when that's going to be. It's already taking forever. When it comes to the open interest, back in 2011, yeah, the price was, we know, most people know, went up to $50 very fast from the end of 2010 to the beginning of May 2011. The open interest until the last month, which is the longs and shorts on the COMEX futures market, was 135,000 contracts all the way up till the very end, and then JP Morgan will let it go, whatever. They started shorting the futures prices. So just recently, the bombing has been so bad, and the terrorization of silver so lousy and consistent. The open interest now, right before first notice date for the July contract, is 137,000 contracts and change. When it went all the way up, again, it was 135,000 till the very end. So we're getting out to the point where it's potentially has the potential to take off out of nowhere, because there's just nothing there to stop it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how things unfold. We do have that July delivery coming up. We've also seen the banks, depending on the metric you use, either get less short or, based on the swap dealer reports, net long in silver. At the same time, we do also have interest rate hikes that have been bigger than most have expected, and really a lot of chaos in the market. Where do you see things going from here? Could we potentially be facing something like 2008, where they hammered the paper price down even as the markets were imploding and people were buying physical silver?
Well, again, which is where I come from. It's all about the gold cartel and what they can get away with, and do they have enough physical silver to get the job done? Gold's very close to breaking down. Silver's just, I mean, it's just a nightmare. And gold, if it gets below 1800, it could be a massive short-term top. And yes, it could happen. But go back before this epic suppression became the law of the land, interest rates going what? In what, 1980, what, to 19%, 20%? And gold and silver went up during this whole time, not down. So, I mean, it's a place of refuge during this time. And everything just, for me, it's completely out of control, because the bad guys with these rates have just made such an effect on people, they don't want to go near it anymore. They keep running away all the time.
Yeah, I think that's had a big impact where I think a lot of people get the fundamental reason for silver, yet when the price doesn't move, and most people they want to see a return, understandably so, on their money. And I think a lot of that has helped kill the interest. Although, Bill, if you go back, it's interesting because you mentioned the perceptions people have of how these things should be priced. But going back to 1980, some of the things that remind me of what we're seeing now, we had the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. We also had the Iran hostage crisis situation. Some people make it seem as if this whole thing was just the Hunt brothers trying to corner the market. Yet we had gold and basically a lot of the other commodities spike then as well. So, what would you say there about putting this all into perspective for folks?
Well, that is my perspective. That's the way it should have been this time too. But you've got this the gold price suppression scheme, which includes silver, has just gone on steroids, and I've never seen anything like it. Every day, they're at it almost, not quite, but and you got again, gold was this high 10 years ago. Silver, what 40 years ago? No matter what, it was able to do it. Silver was able to do it in 1980 and was able to do it in 2011. And now it doesn't even, it's not allowed to rally. I was joking, what, a month or so ago about how lowly the price 22 is. Now it can't even get through 22 on the upside. It keeps going, and I expect it to end, but it doesn't.
Well, we're recording on Tuesday night, and like you said, you can see right on the New York Open again a lot of selling pressure, and we did see the customary high volume. So again, I think it's only fair to point out to folks we could be in something like 2008, and that's why I think having a long-term perspective at least makes the decisions easier for me. Although, Bill, last question for you today. Back in 2011 was our second time we saw silver spike very close to $50. And then that one Sunday night, you see the price drop down to $42. And I've been thinking about that a lot because really, if we ever get any understanding on what really happened there, I think that's still useful because we had US getting downgraded. We had QE. That was why I bought a 1,000-ounce block of silver at the end of 2010. So was it just that bids were pulled? Do we know anything more about how the price just fell $7? If it was only because the banks hammered it, that's what led me to believe that perhaps the natural momentum of the market was taking it north of 50. Any insight as you've thought about that or studied that over the years?
That's just my opinion, that's all. But as I mentioned, JP Morgan let it go all the way up. I think was buying physical silver all the way up. They know it got to 50 once before, and then it was never up there again for all those years. They made a decision to attack one time and drop the price straight down, and that was the end game. It didn't crash at that point because gold didn't make a high until September 6th or so, a month after GATA's conference in London, when it went up above 1900, 1920, I think, and then went back down to 1868. And that's when both the gold and silver began to go down for the last 11 years. And it's still a struggle. And it's because of this gold cartel, which nobody would even discuss. With all the controversy going on in the world today about various issues and things, it's not even allowed to be discussed. It took the Russians way back when to talk about it, and even the Chinese were talking about it.
Well, and then in the end, I think it's interesting you mentioned throughout all of that, you still hold on to your silver.
Oh yeah, I'm all in, and I still expect silver's going to 100. And when it does make its move and gets above 30, it's going to be rock and roll time. But has this been a big league stress thing? Yeah, it's the worst acting market I've ever seen in 50 years relative to fundamentals. Again, I'm all in. Major bull just wrong at the moment because of what JP Morgan is able to do. They have just enough physical silver to facilitate their paper games, and it's just terrible.
Well, I think your perspective makes a lot of sense, especially if you're trying to find things that are undervalued. They don't always go when we would suggest, although interesting people I find that have studied the commodity markets a long time, like you, understand that a little better. And again, I think it's good for everyone to make their own decisions. Although, Bill, before we wrap up, could you let folks know your website? You have your daily column, which I'm excited to get. And for people who might want to read more about that, where do they find you?
Sure. So metropolicafe.com. People can sign up for a 2-week free trial. And been at it since September of 1998. And my colleague, Chris Powell, Secretary Treasurer of GATA, does a tremendous job at gata.org, and that's a free list. And he gets out all kinds of good stuff. So if you want to give it a try, go right ahead.
Well, I sure appreciate that. And it reminds me being back on the trading post in 2011 when nobody around me was talking about gold or silver or understood it. They also didn't see the housing bubble coming. So appreciate you joining me, everything you've stood up for and done. I know it's certainly not an easy role to be in, to follow these markets when it seems like something should happen, yet appreciate you being out there every day and sharing what you're seeing and being a great leader to me as well.
Thank you, Chris, for all you do.
All right. Appreciate that. And we'll catch up with you again soon, Bill. Thanks
All
again.
right.
Well, thank you, Bill. I sure appreciate that. And I can sure appreciate the journey that he has been through and really understanding. I know it's not easy for people at home watching where we see things building, and a lot of us who believe in the fundamental valuation of silver being higher, yet not seeing that play out, which I guess depends also when you're measuring it by. Silver was in the teens a couple of years ago, has been above 30 briefly in recent years. And in the end, I appreciate that Bill is just out there sharing what he is seeing. Similarly, another person that helped me on my journey was Keith Newmeyer of First Majestic Silver, one of the companies that's still finding a way to bring silver out of the ground at this current environment, which is not being made easier by the rising inflation cost and a lower than I would have expected silver price in the face of 8% inflation prints. As you can see here, back in April, First Majestic produced 7.2 million ounces of silver equivalent in the first quarter. That's 2.6 million ounces of silver and 58,892 ounces of gold. And certainly from their Jarrett Canyon property, they've gotten more gold exposure, which certainly has helped at a time where the gold price still at the higher end of the range, even with silver being lower. So thank you to First Majestic for bringing us today's video. And for some more coverage of the silver market, including how the banks have been narrowing their short position and by some metrics are even now net long. Well, Dave Kranzler had that report last week and it is coming your way now.